Thank you, Jeff. That was spectacular and amazing work. My whole view on what is the cutting edge of this activity has shifted. Really, really great to hear about. We had a plan for this conference today to have a patient here at the podium and here joining us on the panel. We failed with that plan. It wasn't for lack of trying, but we were not able to bring about having someone here who's been through part of this process and could join us in informing our thinking about this. So we have a compromise. It's definitely a compromise, but it's something that we think will be helpful to us, and it comes to us by virtue of MITS. Everyone here, I think, knows the Medically Induced Trauma Support Service, a great resource we have here in Massachusetts, a core participant of our MACRMI group. Winnie Tobin, who is the Director of Communications, is here to introduce a video that we have here for you showing the patient's perspective.
All right, thank you, everybody. It's terrific to be here. This has been a wonderful program, and I'm Winnie Tobin. I'm not Linda Kenny. She's the victim of a dentally induced trauma this morning, so I'm here to pinch hit. So I have very little to say because I think that the video is really going to speak for itself, but we are very happy to be here, and we're very happy to be part of the Alliance, because from the very beginning, they knew that it was very important to bring in the patient's voice in this Alliance, and so that is our role. And we're trying to make sure that every room, every discussion has the patient voice. So they asked us to bring in a patient, and there are a number of people that we thought of, but there was an especially eloquent woman who we thought of who couldn't join us this morning because she is a professor at Babson and she's very busy and she has stuff to do. So we brought you the next best thing, which was a video. Again, I'm not going to go over her story. It's self-explanatory. She also talks about what a care program would have meant to her had it been available during her event or at the time. But I think that what I want to say about it and what I want to note is that her event happened a number of years ago, and she has experienced, you know, the perspective that you get with time. And she also came to us and she received some support, and not just from us, but from the entire MITS community. So she was sort of able to get to the place where you'll see this morning, and I don't think that that happens so quickly for people. So I just want us to remember that you can do and say all the right things, but healing is a process, and sometimes it takes time. Thanks.
Well, I think that was extraordinary, and I assume that Linda and Winnie will convey back our appreciation for Peg's time and effort on this. Incredibly articulate, inspiring, sobering, and remarkably insightful, I think, and is telling to all of us. So I would next like to introduce someone who has spoken, I think, here 3 previous times in this room. Rick is the Executive Director of the Office of Clinical Safety at the University of Michigan and is viewed by most, including myself, as the real father of disclosure, apology, and offer. He has been a tireless and inspirational resource for us here over the last 7 years as we've been going through this process. He has presented, again, as I mentioned, at multiple meetings. He's participated in our planning grant and now in our implementation process and consulted on multiple issues. He's going to discuss the cultural impact of his model and the impact it's had at the University of Michigan, and his perspective and comments on what we've talked about today and what he's heard. And then we're going to open it up and bring up a panel and open it up to your questions and comments, and he will moderate that. So thank you so much, Rick, for being here once again.
Thank you for the invitation, and I've been here so many times, it's starting to feel like home. I deny paternity. And I get nervous when I hear that I'm the father of anything other than my 3 monkeys at home. I deny paternity because there were and are lots of people who talk about this. Dr. Steve Kramen published years before I even left private practice. He was the chief of medicine at the VA hospital in Lexington, Kentucky. But I think about other people like Jim Conway. I have vowed never to say anything in public nice about Jim because of the grief that I get from him every time I come to Massachusetts. But Jim Conway behaved in a way that was courageous when he was with the Dana-Farber. He behaved in a way that said and screamed accountability. And then every time I get tired, I've been at this since 2001, and I do get exhausted at times of the fight. Every time I get tired, I think of Lucian Leap, who's been at this for decades and has been such an important voice in this area. No, I'm sorry, I am not the father of this. This issue is frustrating for me for a reason that gets more and more well-honed and well-defined as time goes on. Because even today, we've talked largely about medical malpractice. And the short-term emotional draw of medical malpractice, the financial draw, the pain to everybody involved in litigation, really does draw too much attention, in my view, because we don't talk enough about a more important thing, the accountability that has been missing, and missing from medicine in some very serious and important ways. I'm a trial lawyer by training. I look for evidence. And medicine is an interesting place for me to watch and be part of, because it's inherently dangerous. You can't, as caregivers, do anything without risking harm to somebody. And that doesn't mean that you did something wrong. Every year, kids die from allergic reactions to the standard antibiotics given for ear infections. And it's probably the only inherently dangerous profession I know that is so punitive when things go wrong. But that doesn't excuse the lack of accountability. And what I've discovered after a dozen years of watching this mature is that that's really what it's about. Just some examples of what I mean when I say lack of accountability. We have too many hospitals in this country who think that their threshold for performance is just to meet Joint Commission standards. I think we should be embarrassed that we have a whole industry like the Joint Commission that has to be a watchdog for us. Why do we have outside agencies telling us what never events are? That, to me, is evidence of a lack of accountability. Peer review all around the country, frankly, is largely meaningless and sometimes cynically a joke. That conspiracy of silence is way too strong right now, even now. So it's great. I don't mean to be a shrew. I'm grateful to hear all this great work that's being done, but we have a lot of work to do. Even talking about disclosure. Keeping the facts from a mom who just lost her child is not strategic, it's cruel. Not talking to the very patients who we are in union with to help is not smart, it's immoral. We shouldn't have a title like disclosure, it should be the norm. And that's what I dream about. That's where I think we need to go. So what I want to do is share with you just a little bit. If I had to title this talk, I would borrow from one of my most favorite Dr. Seuss's books, Oh, the Places You'll Go. Because we are so far at Michigan now from worrying about lawsuits. Lawsuits, honestly, are background noise. They're important background noise. I don't discount the importance and the emotional and financial importance of it, but it is completely background noise, and there are so many pieces of evidence that tell me now we're not going to backslide. I used to worry, maybe even as recently as 5 years ago, that if I got hit by a bus, we would backslide. It would be too easy to slide back, and maybe that was really hubris instead of reality. But I don't think that's the case anymore. Just a few examples of what I'm talking about. The claims process alone has changed dramatically. I settled a case at Christmas time last year for $5 million. The jury potential of that case was easily $50 million. Was the brain damage of a otherwise healthy 28-year-old woman who is locked now in a paralyzed body and would require around-the-clock care, and yet she had a pretty normal life expectancy except for the risks to her health that we caused. When I settled that case, I worked with a lawyer who has been at catastrophic injury cases for 40 years. He is probably the preeminent medical malpractice plaintiff's lawyer in the state, and when we finally finished that negotiation, he sent me a really remarkable letter. And the letter said, in my 40 years of representing brain-damaged babies, largely, and others, this is the first time in my career I've ever known what it would actually take to take care of somebody. Because the shift in our world has changed dramatically from that old claims management way of thinking of things, what's the worst thing that a jury can do to us, and how low can we get this case, and we beat ourselves into the middle, to instead a really legitimate talk about what will it take to fix that damage, or at least meet it. And we united around the reality of care, not the arguments about the damage. It's a remarkable shift. We've seen little things I would never have anticipated. Plaintiffs' lawyers saying to patients, if the University of Michigan's at the table, I can't take a contingency fee. I will bill you hourly to help you through that process, but I'm not going to take a full third of your recovery because they're already there. That's amazing to me. And what I've discovered is when you act ethically, everybody around you rises to that. So all of the fear that prevents us from talking to people, if we get rid of that and take the first step, I think it makes a difference. And I've seen it, and I've lived it, and I'm positive it will happen. Let me just share with you some of the things that I've seen. Incident reports at our institution went from 2,400 to 20,000 last year. That didn't happen because we're less safe. It happened because the staff now believes that good things will come of reporting these things, and that our biggest challenge now is to deal with that fire hose that we've established of information coming in, and how do you get back to people? It's a good problem to have. Our peer review process is unlike anything I've ever seen before, and it was not possible without decreasing the defensiveness that occurs around medical injuries. We now evaluate people on evidence-based pieces of IT that we're able to pick from all the pockets that exist in every hospital, and start evaluating people before anybody gets hurt. Malpractice is a lagging indicator at best if it's ever used at all. Why wait until somebody gets hurt? We now have a peer review process that is integrated with our quality improvement. It is evidence-based, it's proactive, and it's compassionate to the caregivers. It's not punitive. We're able to get our arms around people who we identify as being challenged and make them better doctors and make them safe immediately before somebody gets hurt. Our root cause analysis. I looked at our root cause analysis. I looked at the action list from the past 10 years. Literally 80% did not result in change. 80% of action items that came out of our root cause analyses for 10 years did not result in change. We have radically changed our root cause analysis, but that would not be possible in a defensive environment. Our organization entirely is changing. I argued in June of 2005 in a written proposal that the difference between patient relations, quality improvement, and risk management is really meaningless. It should exist on a continuum. So if somebody sits in our waiting room for 5 hours and leaves ticked off versus someone who sits in our waiting room for 5 hours and has an MI is really the same problem. It's just a matter of degree, and why not get on the first before the second happens? We have now truncated all of these departments into a singular Office of Clinical Safety. It was supposed to be called the Office of Patient Safety, but the acronym is OOPS, and I didn't think anybody would take that seriously. My own title has changed. I've gone from Chief Risk Officer to the Executive Director of Clinical Safety, and 6 doctors, only 6, I guess is the good news, called the Office of Clinical Affairs and said, what the hell do we have a lawyer in charge of clinical safety for? And the answer is because you guys haven't done it yourself. These things, these IT integration efforts Every hospital has pockets of information that could inform us about the quality of care before somebody gets hurt. Patients do 24 hours by 7 vigils at loved ones' bedsides in the ICU, and they see a lot. Do we aggressively go out and ask them, what's bothering you? Is there anything that you've seen that troubles you? We haven't done that traditionally. We are now. And I'm casting a big web around the organization to try and pull this in. But the point of all of this is, what started as a concern about medical malpractice has morphed very convincingly into a whole organizational effort toward patient safety. So I think that's just a glimpse of where you're going to go. I want to leave you with this. You have had a rough run for the last few weeks, and we've talked about dangerous people here in Boston, but I think of that phrase, dangerous people, differently. Many years ago, I read one of my most favorite books by T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, who wrote a book called The 7 Pillars of Wisdom, and I keep this quote in my wallet. This is important to me. All men dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds wake in the day to find that it was a vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they may act their dreams with open eyes to make it possible. I love what's going on with this effort and the CARE effort. Let's leave here and pledge to be dangerous men. Let's make these dreams possible, because this is not necessary, the reality that we have with the status quo. So thanks for that. It's my pleasure to ask, I guess we're going to convene the panel now. We're going to convene a panel that will take some questions, and you've met most of the folks: Alan Woodward, Ken Sands, Michelle Mello, Jeff Driver. You haven't met Evan Benjamin. He's an associate professor of medicine at Tufts School of Medicine and the Sackler School of Graduate Biomedical Sciences, as well as senior vice president and chief quality officer for Bay State Health in Springfield. Bay State hosts 3 pilot sites for the CARE program. In addition to participating on the panel, Dr. Benjamin will facilitate a lunch discussion later in terms of how to implement CARE at your organization. But before we get started on this, it is my pleasure, in fact, it's my deep honor to call him a friend. Lucian Leap I want to ask Lucian to come. He has a few words to say. He's my hero in every respect.
Thank you, Rick. I really hope you're as excited as I've been over this program. It's really wonderful to see us moving to this stage. Maybe we are finally on the upswing of the adoption curve of doing what we've all known we should have been doing all along. And I want to deeply thank and congratulate Alan and Ken, Michelle, and everybody who's been involved. And Rick, thank you so much for your help to moving us to this point. We've still got a long way to go, but we're clearly on the move, and it's exciting to see. The reason I'm here actually isn't to say all that, which I'm delighted to have the opportunity to do, but I was asked to sub in for Gordy Schiff to give you a word or two about a program that's very much related to what we're trying to do here today, that many of you know about, but many of you don't, and that's why I'm here. Gordy Schiff made a fantastic presentation at the coalition meeting on Monday about this, and so those of you that were there are aware of it. I'm talking about the Promises Project. The Promises Project is a AHRQ-sponsored collaborative which involves a number of major actors here in Massachusetts. I brought my crib sheet so I wouldn't forget who they were. That includes, in addition to the Massachusetts Coalition, the Department of Public Health, Mass Medical Society, the Board of Registration in Medicine, both CRICO and Coveris, the malpractice insurers, Healthcare for All, Brigham and Women's Hospital, and Harvard School of Public Health. And the purpose of this project is to try to improve the safety, efficiency of office practice. And it's concentrating on 2 areas. that the review of malpractice claims has shown are the major causes of malpractice claims and things not going right. And those are reliable systems in the office, specifically in terms of managing test results, managing referrals, and doing follow-up on medication management. And the second is having to do with communication. And I bring this up because, of course, all we've been talking about today has been what happens in hospitals, but we all know that most medical care takes place outside of hospitals, and most doctors in offices really do not have the support systems, and they often do not have the equipment they need and the background and knowledge and training to deal with these kinds of issues. So this project tries to go at that. And the one thing that Gordy wanted me to tell you about was the project we've had as part of Promises to adapt the document that we developed, I think now, my goodness, 2006, so 7 years ago, When Things Go Wrong, which was a group of us risk managers and safety people and patients came together to try to bring into one document what was known about how we should respond when things go wrong. Not just disclosure, but apology, compensation, and creating the right environment and so forth. There was a lot out there, but it was all scattered, and we thought it would be of value to bring it all together and see if it would help the Harvard hospitals create a much better environment and move ahead on this. It's hard to know how much impact any document makes, but clearly we've seen a lot more interest since then. We've had the development of training programs so that people in our hospitals are getting better at communicating. We have coaches, we have support systems, work closely with MITS and others in terms of supporting both the patient and the caregiver when things go wrong. So hopefully it's made a difference. The Promises project was, how do we make something like that can be used in the office environment? And so we have, if you will, condensed that down to a 4-page guide sheet for the practitioner in the office. It's now available on the Coalition website. You can get it and download it. And we're hoping that it will turn out to be useful to people in, as we say, the much more common environment, which is everyday practice where things still also go wrong. So I just wanted to bring that message at the request of Gordy Schiff and encourage you all to take advantage of that. And again, express my appreciation to all of you for the tremendous amount of work you're doing. Thank you so much.
The article Lucian just referred to is in your folder. Now we're going to start our panel discussion, and I would just ask anybody who has a question, please use the microphone so that we can capture that on, I assume we're recording this? Okay, good to know. Anybody have questions? Maybe I can, while you're coming to the microphone, Michelle, you've done really the work in pulling all of these experiences together in terms of the whole field, I think. Do you see anything more promising? Is there anything else that we should be doing that we're not?
Well, I continue to worry about cases where, like Peg Metzger's, where we have someone who was very hurt and where it is not clear that that is a winnable case when the standard of compensation is negligence. I was just chatting with Dr. Sands about this as we listened to the video. You know, it seems to me that the ideal system is one in which society, maybe it's hospitals, maybe it's social insurance, or some other mechanism provides for the needs of medically injured patients without regard to fault. And we're not there, and I don't think any of these programs aspire to go there for good reasons. Aside from that, I don't see anything else on the landscape that I think has the potential reach of this kind of program. I think we do need to think about what happens when we have a failure in these programs to reach a resolution, and for that I do think the judge-directed settlement model is a promising complement to what's going on here. We don't want to lose control completely over those cases when they go to litigation, so finding some way to continue to work towards resolution within the judicial system, I think, is also promising.
Hi, I'm Mike Kelleher from Reliant Medical Group. Alan shared some of our data earlier. First of all, thanks very much for great presentation from all speakers. I do have a question for Ken and for Jeff as it relates to those cases, not unlike the one we just saw Peg describe, where the standard of care may well have been met. So it's likely that the consent form she signed referenced both perforation and pancreatitis. The peer review process may well have concluded that her care was within standard. But as I understand the protocols that you've shared, in those cases where the standard of care is met, you wouldn't offer a meeting with the patient and family, but would have someone else address it. I'm looking just to clarify that point, because for us, we've done about 110 of these disclosure meetings, and almost half of them fit that description, where there was a really bad adverse event, but no substandard care. And we find that it's actually the toughest category of meeting for us to help patients and families understand how that can happen.
I can go first. I mean, I think it may be different in our two models, but if you look at our algorithm, this would probably be, was there significant harm? Yes. Was standard of care met? Let's operate on the assumption that we say yes, and that nothing actually was done wrong. There was an error. It was just a very severe adverse event. That does fall into a box that says there is immediate communication and explanation to the patient. It wouldn't necessarily go through what we call the care protocol, which means insurer is engaged around understanding the event and evaluating compensation and or other aspects of resolution. But to ask your principal question, yes, the algorithm specifies that there would be a meeting, full
So it would be a meeting with that
yes,
patient.
full communication about what happened. I mean, I think a patient like Peg certainly needs an explanation of why this situation arose, what exactly happened, why it wasn't preventable, if that's in fact the conclusion. So we have specified that in the algorithm.
So I'd add to that, remember that we define loss quite broadly, and part of the loss is loss in confidence. So this video, although we don't know the full facts, it suggests the standard of care was met, but nonetheless there is a loss of confidence. Our communication continues. Unlike the drop boxes that you saw in the care program, we actually have one other box, and that's called patient-directed closure. We keep communicating, even once we've made our conclusion and we express that conclusion and communicate it, we continue the path of communication because it's about patient healing and that broader view of loss. So to answer your question directly, there's a constant communication from my office now through the patient advocate.
Okay, so in both cases, it wouldn't just be a letter or a call from somebody in the patient's advocate office then? Great.
Evan, your Bay State was actually an early adopter. Dr., is it Pito?
Yeah, Dr. Pito's here with us today.
He's asking next. He's up next.
Wrote an article, and what has your experience been in cases where the standard of care seems to have been met, and somebody's complaining? Has Bay State's approach to that included conversations with them?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. One of the things that are important to recognize, we came up with the name CARE, and it was really a departure from the idea of offer, from DAO, and using the term resolution. And what we find is that when patients are actually involved, and we just had one recently at our hospital, a case very similar to what you heard Peg describe, which was really the standard of care, it was probably met, but things happened that were adverse outcomes, and it was really a matter of what patients wanted to hear was resolution. They wanted to understand what happened. They wanted to hear the story, and really, it wasn't a matter of compensation. It really was not offer that really needed to be on the table, but really wanted to be heard, wanted to have their story heard, and wanted to feel that the organization actually was understanding what happened to them. And so in those cases where there's significant adverse outcomes, we're trying to have those conversations, and not so much around the offer or compensation, but around resolution for making sure that we're there to listen and we're there to resolve the case.
I would be slightly more blunt and say, You can't even competently and confidently know what happened and arrive at a conclusion until you hear the patient's side.
Thank you.
So I'm totally intrigued with the patient advocate model. So my question is directed to Mr. Driver. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this lady works with your system? Is she full-time? How does she meet with the team? Is it phone communication, email communication? I mean, it sounds like an art system and everyone, so there are a lot of moving parts, especially when you're driving to a 3-day, 7-day sense of completion. How does this person work, and what's it like with her on board compared to when she wasn't on board?
So the first thing you need to know is she's not an employee of Stanford in any of our entities, not the university, not the insurance company, not the hospitals. She's independent, and we want her to be an independent advocate for the patient. So her role, like the visual, is to stand between patient and the claims team and be that constant source of communication. So we heard from the video, typical problem. You get a one-time hit here, a communication, a disclosure communication. There may be some follow-up communications, but the patient need is actually much greater. Her role is to stay by the patient's side from the beginning to the end and after the end. She actually will check in after we conclude the case. So my claims people will close their file, they're done, but she continues on. So we've just started this process. I really don't think there's any models to follow. I was a patient advocate. It's different than a patient advocacy role. It's more specialized. We have to be much more careful in the communications. We're talking about something that has the legal process, medicine, and the fusion of the two, so it's a complicated area. She works entirely with my staff and my insureds, my physicians, and my nurses, but she's hired to really be by the patient's side every step of the way. She does things for us that are quite amazing. She opens our minds to other issues that we may not have thought of, and this is what's really changed in our process. We do the evaluation, the assessment, and we have our mind set one way, and then all of a sudden our ears are open to something different, and we might be thinking slightly differently and going down a different pathway. And so that's sort of the beauty of this new model for us.
So, Jeff, who employs her, and organizationally, where does she exist?
She's an independent contractor, and we contract with her.
She's paid hourly or case by case?
She lives in Reno, so she does a lot of her work by phone. We bring her into Palo Alto quarterly to meet with her. So she's paid on an hourly basis.
Michelle, you're working now on phase 2 of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation grant that you and Tom Gallagher have, in part to evaluate the quality of the discussions from both the caregiver side and patient side. Would you talk just a little bit about that? Because I think it fits with this question.
Sure. So we've been working with Rick and his staff and Jeff and his staff and others for a couple of years now to develop and get into the field a patient experience survey. Tom Gallagher and others have done survey work on patient experiences of disclosure, but this builds on that work and then goes beyond to try to assess patients' experience with the Pearl process or the University of Michigan process in terms of resolution as well. We've had a number of challenges in doing that work as scientists, a lot related to IRBs and institutional fears about what happens when you ask patients these kinds of questions. And it's Tom Gallagher has analogized it to, fears that you shouldn't ask patients if they're suicidal because that might prompt them to think, oh, gee, maybe I should kill myself. So lots of, we've tried to field this in other places where more risk-averse institutional officials have worried that the mere process of asking patients what they think will prompt lawsuits where otherwise there might be none. Assuming, we've also had issues about privacy, HIPAA concerns around how do you do this kind of work. So I think and expect we're going to be able to surmount those, and at Michigan we are actually ready to go into the field. But we think this work is really, really important, and it's just a first step. As I was talking with Linda and Winnie about at the break, one of the big questions is when do you go to patients with these questions? Because I think as Peg's video illustrates, the answers that you'll get at a week are different from those you'll get at 3 months, which are those that are different than you'll get at 12 months. So the next study I want to do is a a longitudinal study of patients' experiences following a group of patients over time as they navigate these processes, make decisions about litigation. I think that is going to really lend unique insight into how patients experience the process of resolution of medical injury.
So Ken, compiling care.
Rick, can I sit down?
Oh, no, just, this will take 2 seconds.
All right, hurry up.
Well, you can sit right there. Ken, in compiling the concept of care, and I would agree with Jeff's characterization that it's wonderful to see how you've thought so big. Have you thought about the evaluation process of how you're going to evaluate the quality of the communication and those sorts of things, person to person?
Yeah, and that's a big part. We've been thinking about it at the beginning, and I think that's a big part of what we've asked Michelle and her team to do, along with Alan Kichalia, who's here, to be formally evaluating the patient perspective on the event, as well as the clinician perspective. Those are things that we have on our list that we want to do as part of this in some formal way. It's hard to do, as you can imagine, but we do want to take a very formal approach to that.
Okay, Linda.
Yeah, thanks. No, I'm sitting here going, oh my God. I've been in and out of the room for my cough, so I'm like, please hurry up before I start. I just want to say, every time I have a reaction, every time I hear somebody say patient complaints, and I would hope that all of us, you used a different term, Evan, that we change that and we say concerns, because I think when people are saying this was my experience and they want to change it for somebody else, I don't think they're complaining. It's concerns. Complaining is the color of the Jell-O. Do you know what I mean? The other thing I want to say is that I think we have another area that we really have to do more scientific studies on, because I don't think we'll ever get to your needs until we do that. That's the emotional impact and the trajectory. Excuse me, I'm having an asthma attack as I speak here. Oh, I have the inhaler, don't worry.
I was just reaching for a card.
Yeah, no, see, I'm good. I saw his eyes go like this, holy. We have to see, how they heal over time, because we keep hearing from patients, it's 3 to 6 months, and even when you're having those initial conversations, I know for me, I mentally, physically, and spiritually couldn't even hear anything. I couldn't take it in. I didn't have the ability. So I think we have to see if we can study that hand in hand, the emotional to when they can hear better, and see how we can meld that. So I just wanted to say, if anybody wants to take that on, I'd be happy to help.
I think
And
that's
thank you.
that's a wonderful point, and we actually, in one of the grant groups that Michelle and I both are supporting, there was a big debate about when do you talk about compensation, whether you talk about compensation, and then you have the reality, and I think the rightness that I heard from Lucian one day at the National Press Club, when he said, disclosure without compensation is like taking a shower with a raincoat. You may feel warmer afterwards, but you're still dirty. And I believe that too. So, but when is the right time? How is the right way? As you've already talked about, the words we use really matter.
And you say compensation, and as a patient, I feel like that's a dirty word for us.
Yeah.
Like we're money-grubbing, seekers. And honestly, I love that we're using resolution, because in a lot of cases it's, Peg wanted to have information. I know one lady talked to me, she wanted a big rock in her yard with her father's name engraved, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And money for counseling for the family. So I think we need to think about the words we use, because compensation to a patient, and I know in your program, they came back and they raved about how your people really find out what the needs are of the family or loved ones that maybe don't make it. So you obviously have that, but you just think about the language, because as patients, we just react differently. It makes us feel dirty, and we're just getting resolution, and sometimes that needs to be money. Peg's right. Anybody else in her position, if somebody didn't have insurance, that would have bankrupted them, her story. So anyway, thanks.
So thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Paula Griswold with the Massachusetts Coalition for the Prevention of Medical Errors. And first, just a tremendous compliment. The coalition is part of the leadership group, but we are so excited about this work. Compliments to Ken and Evan and your organizations for taking this on. Alan, for this being your life's work. I remember many years ago those early meetings, bringing in COPIC and starting building toward this, and the work with the roadmap, and that there's actually legislative changes, so just extraordinary accomplishments already. I'd be interested, Rick, you commented on it a little bit, but particularly our organization, we're not only deeply valuing that the individual patient and family is going to be treated the way they deserve with this program, but also extremely interested in how this accelerates the improvements in patient safety. And both what you've seen as the opportunity, as well as for Stanford and University of Michigan, or the other programs around the country. If any of the panelists would say a little bit more about what have you seen, what have you been able to do that actually has shown those improvements in patient safety as a result of this change in culture and change in approach.
Jeff?
So, remember I gave you the visual that PEARL is one part of an overall risk management process, and it really plugs into risk identification. And it's our view that much of the accidents waiting to happen, and maybe perhaps even some of the accidents, are below the radar. They're just sort of below our perception. And this is why we've opened things up to get referrals directly from patients. Having now knowledge is power, I sort of concluded knowledge is power. One of the powerful elements is getting information you otherwise would not have, whether it's an increase in incident reports or actually acting on actionable information as it comes in. By the time we're doing this, we've already solved the underlying problem, hopefully. I mean, that it should be on a fast track to quality improvement and correcting the system so that it doesn't occur again. Everything else happens after. That should happen within like the first day, and you saw that as one of my bullet points. It's take those actions to make all other patients situated safe. So there's a direct correlation through a process like this in good safety and risk and quality management in hospitals.
Evan, can you talk about Bay State's connection, what you've seen over the years in terms of the shift toward connecting those dots?
You know, Paul, it's a great question, and I actually also see this as sort of feeding on itself, that necessary for us to have really begun the process of the initial care work and what we call disclosure and apology first, we really needed a foundation of a culture of safety. And I think what happens is, that culture of safety is really based on having understanding of teamwork, where people feel comfortable challenging each other, where there's transparency in the organization, using an adverse event reporting system, and people feeling like there's a just culture, so they're actually reporting and people are responding to those reports, where the organization has understanding of system thinking and the intersection between human factors and systems. And some type of just culture when there is an event, how humans are evaluated. I think that's really a foundation. In many ways, it would be difficult to jump into care without having all that as a foundation. Then, once you add to that the promotion of communication, apology, and resolution, it then feeds and further really promotes that culture of safety in the organization. So I think without having that foundation of a culture of safety, you can't begin, but then once you add to it, it really then sort of becomes a vicious cycle of a further culture of safety.
Jim?
I often wake up reminded how proud I am to be from the Commonwealth, and this initiative is another great reason to share that pride. I'm sitting in the audience ruminating, and I'll tell you what I'm sort of buzzing over is, as Peg's case was talked about, people said the standard of care may have been met. In no way, to Peg's expectation, was the standard of care met. I know Peg, I know the story. but it was obvious from the video. But also, we don't run photomats. We don't run drive-throughs. So Peg came in for an outpatient procedure and almost lost her life. So this whole notion of how do organizations respond when there's an unanticipated outcome? Why didn't anybody drop by that room? Don Berwick once wrote about nobody ever asked him in all the great centers what they could learn from he and Ian's experience. So I'm hoping that as part of this process, this whole notion, and what I love, Jeff, about what you're doing, Saul's work and others has shown that patients and families see dramatically more events. How we think about responding to the adverse event. There was a case in the Southwest about a little boy, Brandon Reel, who died in the hospital. And the hospital didn't know it was their fault or somebody else's fault, so they waited for the coroner's report, and that took 6 months. In the time, the whole community rose up against the hospital because Christmas came, the family had a dead kid that wasn't at Christmas, and nobody knew what happened. So I think we're going to have to, I'm grown up, I understand what the notion means of the standard of care was met. But as we focus now on the care continuum and we focus on the whole experience, we have to be very careful about that language we use when we use it, particularly now that the patients, the public, the family is a partner in their care, that definition of the standard of care is multidimensional.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's an excellent contribution. I would even take it a little bit further. One of the things that our experience has shown us is the way we treat people before unanticipated events happen makes a big difference. I hate the concept of informed consent. I hate it because to too many people it's a form to be signed. To others, even when it's done well, it's reserved for only special occasions. That should be the norm. The intelligence of that conversation should be the norm, whether your physician's putting you on a statin for cholesterol or about to recommend a colonoscopy. Thanks, Jim. Any other comments, questions? One more?
I'm Brooke Longmaid. I am president of medical staff at Milton. What I'm hearing you say in so many words, and I think we all know, is what we really need to do communicating with our patients is our own humanity. And I think that Jim was just saying that. I think that if we approach this not as a procedure that I'll get a consent form on, but that I have a responsibility of that patient to care for them. And whatever is signed doesn't really matter. That doesn't give me carte blanche. It doesn't take away my responsibility. My responsibility, one human to another. And if we can communicate that in the way that we listen, the way that we share our authenticity, the way that we share our own vulnerability and our hurt when something happens, we connect with the patients. I think that's the primary goal. That is being human, sharing that humanity. And that comes back to values, the values of respect, the values of dignity, the values of justice. And if we live our life that way and look at how we communicate with every patient, every encounter, as well as every colleague, if that informs the way that we interact, then there will be justice.
Thank you very much.
Ken, do you want to give him something?
Okay, I'm just gonna very quickly close things out. Al and I keep turning to each other and saying, this is amazing, we've stayed on time the entire time, almost perfectly. Just a couple of quick announcements before we break. There is a CME opportunity here. That information, I think, is in the packet, that there's an electronic link for how you claim CME, so that information should be available to you. We're finishing this structured program. There is, over lunch, a session we designed for institutions that are early on in this process. If you're putting your toes into these water and you're looking to do something like this in your organization, we have a session planned over lunch. It's going to be facilitated by Evan. Folks signed up for that in advance, and those folks, and based on that, we have a head count for lunch. We'd actually welcome anyone who who is here now and would like to stay for that, whether they've registered or not. You are welcome to stay. However, we only have so many lunches, so feel free to stay if you didn't register, but no soup for you. And that's going to be grab your lunch, come right back in. We're just going to keep on keeping on. There's a few folks that we do want to thank, and we're up here representing the work of many. I want to be very clear that I said that we didn't add resources in our institutions in terms of patient safety personnel. That should not be interpreted as we didn't add work for those patient safety personnel. People have been working very hard to make this happen in our departments, our physician partners outside of our own departments. It has been an effort that's required broad-based support, and so thank you for those that are here and for those that are not here that have been part of that for sure. One person I do want to recognize by individual is Melinda Van Neal, who's been our project manager for this. Melinda, raise your hand. Melinda. As you have seen her do today, she quietly choreographs everything that's occurring around this project flawlessly, and so that things run on time and with great results. So thank you, Melinda. I want to add my personal thanks to Alan, who pulled me into this domain a couple of years ago. It's been a great experience for me. I'm glad to be part of it. But as Paula pointed out, Alan began pushing this rock up the hill long before the number of people that are here now were, and so I'm very indebted to you, Alan, for that effort. Thank you. Okay. Thank you all, and feel free to stay.
And do come back next year.
For our second.